Hello from Melbourne, Australia. The purpose of my session today is to examine HR's role in supporting digital transformation, including examining a case study from Dulux Group, a consumer goods company based in Melbourne, Australia. The research tells us that over 80% of companies that undertake digital transformation fail in their efforts. What can HR do to help? This is the topic of my presentation today, but before I get into the presentation, let me tell you a little bit more about me. My first name is pronounced Siobhan, which is an Irish name that means Joan in English. So my full name is Siobhan McHale. I'm an organizational psychologist by background, and I've spent my career working as a change specialist. I'm passionate about workplace change, and I'm motivated by a vision to make workplaces better. My career has been in two halves. In the first decade of my career, I worked as a management consultant at PricewaterhouseCoopers and Accenture. I started work at PwC in London and then flew in and out of companies across Europe advising leaders about how to manage change. I moved on to the Chicago-based consulting firm Accenture and consulted to clients across the United States, Australia, and Asia. But early in my 30s, I hit a turning point in my career. I was standing in a taxi rank at Chicago's O'Hare Airport in the minus 14-degree temperatures with my eyelashes starting to freeze over, and I realized that yes, I loved my job, but I was yearning for something more. I wanted to move from teaching managers about how to lead change to actually applying the tools. So over the next 15 years, in the second half of my career, I joined a series of large international firms as the executive in charge of change. Now I had some skin in the game, and my job was to make change happen. So I rolled up my sleeves to work side by side with leaders to implement transformational shifts and company turnarounds. One of these, a 7-year change journey at ANZ Bank, became a Harvard Business School case study taught by the change management guru, Professor John Cotter. I'm currently employed as the head of HR at Dulux Group, where my role is focused on helping the company to take its great products into international markets. Dulux Group is an Australian-based paints and consumer goods company with 4,500 employees. The company, as you can see in this chart, has outperformed the market since it demerged from its parent company, Orica, in 2010. It has grown by 226% compared to the 36% average growth of the top 200 companies in the Australian marketplace. In 2017, our revenue was 1.7 billion, EBIT was 214 million, and NPAT was 143 million. I was hired by the CEO to help the company to grow internationally and to become even more consumer focused. I want to share with you my thoughts about the role of HR. In the future, or the future of HR, in my view, is for HR professionals or the HR profession to step into its business leadership role to deliver on the organization imperatives. HR professionals are business leaders with an HR specialty, in my view. The most effective HR practitioners see and take up their commercial role. They do not see themselves on the sidelines of the business, but view themselves as part of the business. In this business leadership role, we must solve for two key challenges. The first imperative for HR is to help run the business. In this role, HR must carry out the activities that help to deliver on the daily operations. In helping to run the business, we may undertake activities such as recruiting the right people, paying staff, upskilling employees. These are the bread and butter activities that help the organization to run and deliver on its everyday business imperatives. The second critical imperative for HR in its business leadership role is to help the business to change and to grow, including how it manages digital transformation. In my experience, this role is often not as well developed for HR professionals, and we need to continue to improve our ability to step into this change role. Why do we need to continue to develop our skills in this area? We know we are living in a time of unprecedented change. Business leaders everywhere are feeling the impact of mega change forces such as globalization, population change, urbanization, the internet, social media, and digital transformation. Each of these forces on its own is very significant, but it is the combined impacts of these colliding forces that make this a very challenging time for business leaders. We've also read the stats on the failure of corporate change initiatives. McKinsey estimate that up to 70% of all change initiatives fail to deliver the expected change benefits. Michael Gale, a digital expert, has studied hundreds of digital transformations, and he estimates that 84% of companies fail at digital transformation. How can HR help in a world where we are facing disruption and colliding change forces? It is worth reflecting on this question. How much of your time are you dedicating to help run the business? How much of your time are you dedicating in your role to changing the business? And are these roles in the right proportions given the aspirations of your business? Do you believe you have the know-how and skills to fully step into your change role and help to increase the rate of corporate success in the transformation area? This is the future of HR and the topic of my case study today. How can we take up a role in HR to help fast-track change in times of disruption? So the case study today that I'll talk about is from a cabinet hardware business within Dulux Group. I caught up with my colleague Ivor for coffee. Ivor is the executive in charge of one of the business units within Dulux Group, our cabinet hardware business, which employs 350 employees. This business supplies handles, hinges, and hardware for kitchens. These hinges, for instance, allow you to have soft closing doors in your kitchen. The business distributes this hardware to cabinet makers who make the kitchens. So I spoke to Ivor over coffee and asked him how business was going. And he said business was going well, and he had a current market share of 17%, and he had aspirations for double-digit growth. However, Ivor could see that storm clouds were gathering on the horizon. His major competitor had already gone online and had transformed its business into a lower-cost digital business via an online channel. Ivor wanted to do the same so that cabinet makers could order his products online and so that he could bring in digital tools such as CRM and real-time inventory management. However, Ivor had a major issue. There was a delay in the digital transformation project, and Ivor told me that he had been waiting for 18 months for his online platform to be delivered by the digital team in corporate head office. So I want you to imagine that you are sitting having coffee with Ivor. You've heard his story. He has growth aspirations for the business. His major competitor has already gone online with an online ordering system, but Ivor has experienced an 18-month delay in getting his digital platform from the digital team in head office. What do you think is the problem here? Take a second to jot down your thinking and your next line of questioning. Where does your mind go to when you hear Ivor's story? What do you think the issue is here? What springs to mind when you hear that the digital team has taken over 18 months to deliver the platform? What's your next line of questioning? The answers in the group probably fall into two categories. The first group of you will have questions about the digital team. You'll be wondering, why are they so slow? Maybe do they have the right skills and capabilities for the job? Do they need further development or upskilling, or do perhaps they need to move into another role? These are questions that focus at the individual level, and this is the area that we've traditionally been taught to focus on in HR. Ivor would have expected me as the head of HR to go and investigate the digital team and to see where were they going wrong. In this case study, however, this is not where the issue lay. The issue lay at the systemic level. So the second group of people listening to this case study may be thinking about what is going on at the systemic level in the relationship between the cabinet hardware business and the digital team in corporate head office that was impacting the delay. They will have questions about the role and the rules of engagement between these two parts of the business. This was the key to unlocking the change in this case study, and this is where I began my exploration. I did not begin with assessment of the digital team. Instead, I took a plane to Queensland, where Ivor's business is located. I spent time with his leaders exploring the question of what is really going on here. In my conversation with the managers in the business, I began to look for the patterns of relating between the digital team in head office and the cabinet hardware business. The underlying issues lay in the pattern of relating between these two parts of the business. So what do I mean by patterns? Patterns show up in nature and in natural ecosystems. The mathematician Edward Lorenz first talked about chaos theory and the butterfly effect, where a small change in one part can create a big impact elsewhere. He saw the underlying order in seemingly chaotic systems. Later on, Benoit Mandelbrot, another mathematician, went on to coin the term fractal to describe these structures that have repeating patterns. He went on to discover the mathematical formula that underpinned these patterns. Repeating patterns appear in clouds, the shape of coastlines, and in snowflakes. You can see these self-repeating patterns in the structure of a fern. As you zoom in on the fern leaf, you see the same fern pattern repeated over and over again in the microscopic parts. A set of mathematical rules govern how these ecosystems operate. Patterns show up in nature and are also found in family systems. Let me give you an example from a story that my old teacher told me, the late systems thinker Irving Borwick. A husband and wife are in a pattern of fighting. Every day when they get home from work, they seem to end up in an argument. The wife might ask the husband to take out the rubbish or trash for the Americans in the audience, and the husband responds, "Oh, I will do it after my favorite TV show." The wife responds, "I haven't sat down since I've come home." And soon they have both stepped into the role of fighter and are in a full-blown argument. So then the husband attends a HR conference and learns about patterns. He makes the decision that he's not going to step into the role of fighter, and instead he brings his wife a bunch of flowers and tells her how much he loves her. What do you think might be his wife's response? Do you think she will welcome him home with open arms? Or do you reckon she might ask, "What have you been up to?" It's likely that she will try and pull him back into the role of fighter because that is the pattern in their family system. She might accuse him of being up to no good, and that is the trigger, and they're back in this argument again. However, the pattern is broken if one of the parties chooses to step out of the role of fighter. Patterns appear in nature, in families, and they also show up in our workplaces. These are the unwritten rules of engagement between the parts. You must be able to see the pattern before you can change the pattern. If you don't see it, then you can't change it. What was the pattern of operating in the cabinet hardware business that was causing the delay in the online platform, you might ask? I spent some time interviewing the leaders in the cabinet hardware business, and this is what I discovered. These were the roles and rules of engagement and the pattern in the cabinet hardware business. The line managers in the cabinet hardware business were taking up the role of receivers of the change, as you can see in this diagram. They were sitting back and waiting for the change to be delivered to them. They were waiting for the change to happen. The digital team and corporate head office were taking up the role of change deliverers. They were the ones who were in the role of doing the change. They were seen to be the ones responsible for making the change happen. The pattern or agreement between these two parts of the business was that digital transformation would be done to the cabinet hardware business. The line managers were complicit in this agreement, and they were sitting back waiting for the change to happen. As a result of the roles that the line managers and the digital team were taking up, there were delays in digital transformation and actually no change was happening. They were all in a perfectly aligned system to not create change. Seeing the pattern allowed both the line managers and the digital team to step out of these roles and to shift the pattern. So, as is the case in many adaptive challenges, the presenting problem was not the real problem. Seeing the pattern moves us from an individual to a systemic analysis. It moves us from pointing the finger at any one person or team and seeing the connections between the parts. It moves us from root cause analysis to the implicit rules of engagement at the systemic level that are keeping the system locked into not changing. The digital team could not lead the change from its role in the organization. This is because the change had both technical and adaptive components. The technical aspect of the change was to build the platform. Putting the digital team in charge of the digital transformation was leading to the delay. The first step in accelerating the change was to identify the pattern in the system. Once we saw the pattern, then we could move to reframe the role of the leadership team in the cabinet hardware business. The role of the leadership team was reframed. This team was now responsible for leading and managing the digital transformation. They were now in role of the change leaders. The change was no longer seen as a purely technical project that sat in the digital team in head office. Yes, the technical challenge of building the platform was vital, but so too were the adaptive components of the change, such as a new operating model and reframing the roles. It was no longer seen as the sole responsibility of the digital team to bring about this change. The leadership team had a collective role in making the change happen. At the heart of this change was the notion of leader-led change. This essentially means that organizations don't change, it is the people who will choose to change. Leaders were expected to step into their role to lead and manage the change. They were no longer in role of observers on the sidelines. They needed to make the change happen in their business unit. So instead of looking for fault in the digital team, we looked at the underlying pattern that was keeping the system stuck. The role of the leadership team was reframed to lead and manage the change. This was not simply the responsibility for their individual business units. Also, the role of the different functions within the cabinet hardware business was reframed. This was important because often people go straight to organizational structure in order to bring about change, instead of figuring out what the operating model is. They go to names and boxes instead of establishing the roles of the different parts of the organization and how these roles need to shift as a result of the digital transformation. We are partnering with an organization called Organomics for the adaptive and operating model work on this change project. Organomics is a niche consulting firm headed up by Joan Lurie, a systems thinker, and it's worth checking out their website. As part of this adaptive work, we reframe the role of different functions within the business. What do I mean by reframing? Let me give you an example. In the past, the sales reps in the cabinet hardware business would go to the cabinet makers and ask them what hardware they needed to make their kitchen. So they would take the orders for door handles and hinges. The cabinet makers might order, for example, 200 hinges, 500 handles, 600 magnetic clasps, and the sales reps would write down the order and ensure that it got entered into the system. He or she would then chase up the order to ensure that it got delivered to the cabinet maker on time. With the new online platform, the cabinet makers were able to order their hardware online. They entered their own order into the system. When the sales rep came to visit to find out what they needed, they said, no, I've done it already. I've done it myself. I've entered the order into the system. It was easy. What was the role now of the sales rep in this new world where orders were entered directly into the system by customers? The role of the sales rep needed to be reframed. This role was reframed as a business developer. The sales reps needed to add value now by helping clients to grow their business and sell in other ways. They needed to move from order takers to growth enablers of business developers. This was one example of the reframing work that we did on this project. Another example was the role of the head of the sales team. In the past, this person saw his role as managing a sales team. He had a team of sales reps that he managed. However, a shift in the operating model meant a change in his role. Now he was expected to use multiple channels to grow revenue. He could leverage online sales, sales reps, a call center, or branches in order to grow revenue and maximize margins. This was a completely different role and a completely different framing of his role that led to different behaviors from the sales managers. These reframes can lead to faster change within the business. Why is this the case? Reframing helps to accelerate change. Let me tell you a story that illustrates why. Sarah Connors wakes up on a Monday morning, greets her husband Mark good morning, and bounds out of bed to face the busy day ahead. In her conversation with Mark about the day, she is in role of wife. She sweeps into the kitchen and meets her 8-year-old twins and immediately switches from her role of mother, or into her role of mother from role of wife. She pours milk onto bowls of cereal and checks for any symptoms of the flu that have been making the rounds at school. 90 minutes later, Sarah steps onto the train and settles into her usual seat before opening her laptop to review the day's schedule at a New York hospital where she works as the head of the cardiology department. On her morning rounds, Sarah talks with a group of first-year medical students, comfortably switching into her role of coach. Later that morning, she catches up with her boss to discuss the need for new imaging equipment in her department, smoothly stepping into the role of negotiator. When a colleague whisks into her office late in the day to ask Sarah's opinion about a troubling diagnosis, Sarah immediately takes up the role of advisor. Note how Sarah's behavior shifts as she moves into all of the different roles she must play each day. She is by nature a rather quiet and reserved woman, but she adjusts her behavior in ways that make her effective in each role. Sarah doesn't talk to her family the same way that she talks with the students, patients, colleagues, or her boss. She doesn't let her personality dictate her behavior. This may seem like a fairly obvious point, but most leaders believe that personality governs human actions and that traits such as extroversion, introversion, shyness, gregariousness, dominance, submissiveness rule an individual's behavior. And in fact, a whole army of trainers and consultants in the field of change management preach this sermon. Figure out the personality types and then change them to support your transformation initiative. That's the hard way to do it, I think. It's far easier to accept people for who they are and work instead on reframing the role to lead to the behavior changes you are seeking for your organization. Role dictates behavior in a way that is just as influential as personality. So what causes Sarah to shift her behavior so seamlessly across these interactions? She is holding a mental map that guides and shapes her behavior, and this mental map influences how she takes up her role at any given point in time. This notion that role impacts her actions is a fundamental concept in my approach to change. And if you grasp and apply this concept, you will be on track to deliver faster change with less turmoil in your business. So what was the role of Reframe and the new pattern in the cabinet hardware business, you might ask? The role of Reframe was that line managers were now expected to be change leaders. The digital team was now in role of change enablers. The pattern of relating changed, and they were now expected to work together to deliver the digital transformation. What happened as a result of these reframes? The online platform finally went live, and in fact, within 2 months of the leadership team stepping into its change leadership role, the new platform was launched, and the leadership team had stepped into the role to lead the change. This was no longer seen as a project that was owned by the digital team in head office, and within 2 weeks of launch, 10% of customers were already using the platform to order stock. What you might be noticing in this case study is that there are two sides of digital transformation, the adaptive side and the technical components. This is from the work of Ron Heifetz, who essentially described these two leadership challenges. So the first challenge in digital transformation is the technical challenge. The technical challenges that are faced during digital transformation might include mapping consumer journeys, building the platform, making sense of the data, or cloud computing, for instance. In these technical challenges, a handful of experts can sit down together and figure out the solution. There are generally tried and tested ways of doing things. These challenges can have often been faced before, and there is a known blueprint for success. The second type of challenge during digital transformation is what is known as an adaptive set of challenges. These are challenges that relate to changing the way people work, challenging mindsets, and reframing roles. Less has been written about the adaptive side of digital transformation, where there is no blueprint for success and no clear pathway. In this case study, we implemented a new operating model and reframed the roles and the rules of engagement of the parts as part of this adaptive side of change. Many digital transformation projects change every facet of the organization, from the back office to the customer interactions. This change has both technical and adaptive components. And in my view, the major reason that digital transformations falter is because of the adaptive component. Leaders do the technical work, but not the adaptive work. But this work is often ambiguous, and you need to navigate in the grey during this adaptive work. And this is the role that HR can play on the adaptive side of the change. It can take up its strategic advisory role to help leaders to navigate in this grey adaptive component of digital transformation. When you ask people to describe a workplace transformation or change, they typically describe a step-by-step process. It often looks like the illustration on the left-hand side of the diagram, where they seem to go from point A to point B to point C in a logical, straightforward manner. The reality is often very different and looks more like the illustration on the right-hand side of the diagram. So adaptive change, it's not linear. There are twists and turns. You must move and adjust as you go. And in the cabinet hardware business, we're in the midst of this complex adaptive change. The important thing in this change is that you keep your foot on the accelerator. Don't take your eye off the prize. Keep focused on the next leg of the journey rather than moving on to the next business priority. So in the cabinet hardware business, we've been reframing roles, introducing a new operating model, designing an action learning program that helps keep the leaders focused and meeting on a regular basis to review how they are managing the change. So essentially, developing that change muscle of the leadership team is really important. So in terms of the overall case study, let me leave you with these three things for my presentation. Number one, HR has a critical role to play in helping leaders to navigate change during these VUCA times, VUCA being volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. We must take up our role as business leaders with our HR specialty to help leaders to better lead and manage the adaptive side of change, including digital transformation. This is where business leaders really need our expertise, and it's helping them to navigate the grey of adaptive change. The second point for my presentation is that it's really crucial to spend time assessing the real problems before jumping to solutions. Remember that the presenting problems are often not the real problems. In the case study you just heard, the problem did not lie with the digital team, but in the roles and the rules of engagement between the digital team and the cabinet hardware business. Thirdly, from my presentation, reframing the role of the parts and individuals can bring about faster change with less noise. Remember the example of Sarah Connors, the head of cardiology, and how she changes her behavior according to her role. So role dictates behavior in a way that is just as powerful as personality. How can you change the mental map that people are holding about their role in order to bring about faster change with less noise? I write about topics of culture and change regularly on LinkedIn, so please feel free to connect or follow me if these are topics of interest for you. Thank you for listening to my presentation.